my tenant a vacant commercial property? You see, the holy grail of creating exponential growth in both cash flow and capital value in your commercial property is learning how to get your property tenanted. So many people are scared of vacancies out there, but commercial property vacancies is not actually that scary. And if you've got a formula, you've got a process, and you understand when you're going to have your vacancy, you can actually prepare ahead of time. In this video, I'm going to share with you some of the techniques, some of the strategies, and how I plan ahead so I minimize the vacancies and I get my tenant when I need them. So make sure you tune in all the way to the end, where I'll be sharing with you some action steps where you can immediately try to get your property tenanted if it's currently vacant. So let's get started. My name is Helen Tarrant. I help everyday Australians become wealthy through commercial property investing, halving the time you need to get to retirement through investing in commercial property cash flow rather than residential. Now, I am here, actually, believe it or not, at our development here in Albury. So you can see it is 4 walls, windows. It is almost done. This was a project we started before COVID. Of course, during COVID, it's brought the timeline back. It was paused during COVID, but now it's fully back on track as a development of a medical center. Now, I'm about to need to go to market to fill this medical center, right? And I need to find out what I need to do to make sure that I actually have the right tenants, right? Because the right tenant mix is going to give me a few things that is going to create the exponential cash flow and growth for our investors. Firstly, the increase in terms of value add. If I have a medical tenant in here versus an everyday tenant, that medical tenant potentially is going to pay a little bit more, but not only a little bit more, but also the value of security in the investor's head when they buy this property is going to be so much more. So we're going to get a better return for our investors, right? So this is why the tenant mix all of a sudden becomes so important, and I need to dissect the market. So I'm going to cover a few key points you need to know if you want to tenant your property fast. Now, there are 4 key points. Number 1, do your research. So understand what your market rent is, understand where the demand is, understand what the market is looking for in terms of a layout plan. So do they want 50 square meters? Do they want 70 square meters? Do they want 120 square meters? How do they want layout? Do they want bathrooms in their suites, or are they happy with communal? Do they want a cafe on site? Like, understand all of the drivers that's making the demand in that market. Now, before we did this development in Albury, we actually drove around. Like, my team drove around, went to every street, every shop, and what we did was we looked at what hasn't been done. We realized in 12 years, never been a medical development here in Albury, and the urban sprawl, a lot of doctors were coming in, not only from overseas, but from Melbourne Metro to come and reside here in Albury, which is why we chose to turn this instead of into a shopping complex, right? We turned this into medical suites, right? So number 1. Number 2, incentives, because incentives is what makes the world go round when it comes to commercial property and attracting the right tenants. Now, tenants are going to be starting out. So for example, we're here across from here, we're going to be in a cafe, right? So a cafe is going to attract a tenant that may take 12 months for them to take off the ground, right? So here we've just had a massive storm beforehand, but you can see we've got some open spaces there, right? Because it's going to be a cafe, right? So it's going to be a bit more open. It's got the outdoor sitting, but a cafe typically won't be really popular, won't be really busy until every one of these suites are filled, and every one of these suites could take 12 months to fill, right? So when we attract a cafe, we've got to give them incentive. And that may be helping them with fit out, because you're coming from a developer point of view or from an investor point of view, we're going to need to put that into the FISO. So helping them with fit out, right, is the number 1 thing with incentives. Number 2, what we do is we look at how much rent free we need to get that tenant to want to come in here. A lot of tenants don't want to be paying rent the first moment they get in, especially when they're new into a premise that they know they might not make money for 3 years. So they might want 3, 6, 9 months rent free and maybe some half rent as well. So we could probably structure a really good incentive for the first 12 months for that tenant. On top of that, it may be that the tenant wants help with some of the equipment that we could help them install. They may want to do something like cool rooms, right? For example, if let's say one of the rooms were meant to be, that just happens to a brewery instead, or if let's say one of the rooms just happens to be converted to a particular retail, like let's say a florist, they would want a cool room, right? But they could not afford it because it's an extra $60,000 or $80,000 in terms of installation. Or perhaps a commercial kitchen could be $150,000, right? So as the landlord, we can help them do that, but we could amortize it against their rent. Like we could increase their rent so they actually are paying us back over a 5-year period. So in commercial property, to attract the best tenants, you've got to get out there, you've got to advertise, incentives, because it is the incentives that make it work, right? Makes one to attract the tenant because you make them start the business look so much easier for them starting the business. So that's the number 2. Number 3 is about making it, comes back to the same one. Number 3 is attracting the right tenant. Right? The right fit is so important, especially here. We've got 12 potential suites here. So we got suites downstairs and we've got suites upstairs. And with these 12 potential suites, that tenant mix becomes fundamental, right? And if you were buying a vacant property right now, or if you have a property that's gone vacant, you need to look around the building and say, where is my tenants? What type of tenants am I going to get, right? And you might find that everyone else might all be allied health. Other people might be medical, or you might be finding that you're professional tenants, right? So when I say about professional tenants, is that you could be having they could all be, there's doctors, lawyers, or they could be financial services, all of those. They could be those type of tenants. Now, if those type of tenants, it doesn't make sense for you to just go out there and attract a different type of tenant. You need to go out and find similar tenants, because similar tenants group together and they create a hub and allows you to increase rent in the future. So what you need to do is observe what's already in the complex. Now here down in Auburn, we're trying to build a medical center and a medical suite. So we're only putting our feelers out. We're only advertising and marketing to doctors, specialists, and anybody who's associated with it, like open mobility, anyone who's associated with that. Whereas if you were buying a vacant property in a retail precinct, you might be saying it's all food. So I'm only going to look at food tenants. What food tenant hasn't come in here? What food tenants are best suited in here? How is the layout? You might be buying an office space that's gone vacant and you can have a look. They're all professional tenants. Then you need to then go out to those associations and attract those type of tenants. So you've got to look at tenant. What is the right profile of your tenant and attract for that? It's almost like working at the target market and attracting that, because I do a dissection of what kind of tenant and how do we target them, and we know then what kind of incentives we can go in, right? So that's the number 3. And number 4, be willing to do a deal, right? The deal-making aspect, so many people lack, but the deal-making aspect is fundamental for you to get your property tenanted, right? Sometimes your tenant is looking at you making an offer on your premise and let's say 2, 3, 4 other premises, right? They might be looking at your premise and going, okay, I'm thinking of 2, 3, 4, 5 different other premises, right? And if they are, then what you want to make sure is that you are the top of the mind. You are the tenant. You are going to be the premise they want to get into. So you got to make a deal. What does my tenant want? What does my tenant need, right? And then you go X, Y, Z. What is negotiable? What isn't? You test out what that is so important for the tenant. Sometimes it is the rent-free period because it allows them to set up. Sometimes it's that they need essential equipment. Sometimes they need a combination of both. Sometimes they just want to make sure they have exclusivity. A lot of dentists, a lot of medical type of speciality, or even when you have like laser clinics, they want exclusivity, right? Or a vet in this area, or a pharmacist, right? So you need to make sure that you give them that exclusivity, right? So find out what's important, be willing to do a deal, because if you're not willing to do a deal, you end up losing the tenant. So hopefully you understand those 4 key elements of what you need to actually get a tenant, right? In there fast, right? Firstly, your research. Research. Understand the market, understand the rents. Make sure you're not overcharging. If everyone's paying $500 a square meter, you might think you should start out with $400 a square meter. You might be thinking, well, that doesn't work. Well, I wanted to get charged them $600 a square meter. But let's see. If the economy is not going well, like when it did when you first looked at buying this property, or maybe you've had the property and you had tenants in there and the tenants suddenly vacated at a lower socioeconomic time versus a higher socioeconomic time. Whatever it is, you might have to just say, well, I'm going to undercut the market, but I'm going to give my tenant a short lease. Right? Am I going to give my tenant a short lease so that I can put up the rents as the market changes? So these are some of the strategies I can use immediately to help me get a tenant, right? So that is the number one thing. So make sure you do your research, you understand. Remember, number 2, incentives. Number 3, profile your tenants and target them exclusively. Number 4, do a deal, because you never want to lose an opportunity to do a deal when you can do a deal with a vacant property. So hopefully those 4 things are key elements to help you getting a tenant fast. And finally, thank you for tuning in. Remember, my name is Helen Tarrant. I help everyday Australians become wealthy through investing in commercial property. Book in for our free strategy session below or join one of our upcoming events. We've got an excellent boot camp coming up that it will be great for you to attend so you can see all the strategies that's being built out in commercial property. But coming back to that final push to get you a tenant in the fastest possible way is the tenant may actually be local to you. Right? A lot of tenants who are coming to you may already be in this building, in this premise, or close by to you, 600 meters, 500 or a K, right? Or they may be in another shopping hub. So let's say the first thing I get my agents to target, if I was renting a retail premise, let's say I was looking to fill a cafe or I was looking to fill up a restaurant, I would say, well, what about some tenants that's in the next hub or the hub that's 2 or 3 hubs away, right? They might want to have another store, another sushi shop, another chicken shop, another pizza shop. They might want to come here. Go and target those people. Tell them there's a great opening. We're going to give them a great special. Implement my 4 strategies, right? And then might get that tenant in. That's number 1. Number 2 is that if you're in an office building, you might find that the psychologist upstairs actually need to expand. The lawyer might have too big a space. They might want to downsize. Whatever it is, you might find the tenants might be actually in that building. So go and talk to them. You might be flyers. You might be just go and talk to them, have a conversation, knock on the door, or get the agents to talk to them. Whatever it is, right? Find the tenants might actually be more local than you think. Right? So those are 2 things. If you look at those 2 things and target them first, they're likely to get your tenant faster than anyone else. And sitting there, just putting an app up on Real Commercial and going, let's just wait for the tenant to respond. That's not what you want. You want to be driving the process. So drive the process rather than let the agent say, oh yeah, we didn't get any inquiries. Make sure you do drive it and be proactive in that process. So if you enjoyed this video, like it, subscribe, make sure you do comment and tell me what you want more of so I can make sure my next video is on that topic. So my name is Helen Tarrant. Help everyday Australians to become wealthy through commercial property. Click the link below, book in for that strategy session, and I'll see you in the next video. For now.